All right, so get ready because today we are going to be taking a deep dive into ego and how it can actually be a major roadblock on the path to success.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And to do that, we're going to be taking a look at some excerpts from the book Ego is the Enemy.
This is something I think we can all relate to at least a little bit. I mean, who hasn't let their ego get the best of them at some point?
Oh, absolutely. We all have those moments. It's part of being human. But the key is recognizing when ego starts to become a problem, when it's actually holding us back
Yeah.
rather than helping us move forward.
And this book, it uses some pretty interesting examples to illustrate this point, right?
Yeah, it does. Like one of the most compelling examples is the story of General William Tecumseh Sherman.
Wait, Sherman, as in the Civil War general, what's he got to do with ego?
Well, on the surface, you might think someone in his position would have a pretty big ego, right? I mean, leading armies, making life or death decisions. But Sherman was actually known for being incredibly humble and self-effacing.
So he wasn't driven by this need for recognition or power.
Not at all. He was much more focused on quietly mastering his craft and serving his country. And the book argues that it was precisely this lack of ego that allowed him to achieve such remarkable things.
It makes you wonder, are we too focused on those external markers of success today? Like the titles, the awards, the social media following.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
And I think it ties into this concept that the book talks about,
hmm
the gap between taste and skill.
The gap between what now?
Taste and skill, it's the idea that we often enter fields, particularly creative fields, with pretty good taste. Like we can recognize excellence when we see it, we have high aspirations.
Right. We know what good looks like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But our actual skills haven't caught up yet. And that gap, that space between where we are and where we want to be can be really uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah. It's like you have this vision of writing this amazing novel, but you can barely string together a coherent sentence?
Ha, yeah, exactly. And that's where ego can sneak in and kind of mess things up. Well, it can be really tempting to try and fill that gap between where we are and where you want to be with ego. We might try to project an image of confidence that we don't actually feel or try to take shortcuts to get ahead.
So instead of just admitting that we have a lot to learn, we might try to fake it until we make it.
Pretty much. But here's the thing, and the book makes this point really clear. Covering up that gap with ego, it might feel good in the short term, but it's ultimately a recipe for disaster
Because?
because it prevents us from doing the real work, the hard work, of actually developing our skills and closing that gap between taste and skill.
So we're basically just postponing the inevitable.
Exactly. And probably making things worse for ourselves in the process. Like the book says, it is in precisely this gap that ego can seem comforting. Who wants to look at themselves and their work and find that it does not measure up?
It's like avoiding that tough conversation you know you need to have.
Yeah, only it's with yourself. But, the thing is, we all have that gap to some extent. Even the most successful people, they're constantly learning, constantly growing.
Right. So it's not about eliminating ego entirely.
No, I don't think it is. Ego can be a powerful motivator, a source of drive and ambition. It's about recognizing when it starts to become a problem, when it starts to hold us back from reaching our full potential.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we tell the difference between healthy ambition and ego-driven arrogance? How do we make sure we're not letting our ego sabotage our own success?
That's the million-dollar question.
Mm.
And the book dives into that in a lot of detail, particularly through the example of General Sherman and his approach to leadership.
I'm really curious to hear more about that.
Well, like we were saying earlier, Sherman wasn't driven by a need for recognition or power. He was much more focused on the long game, on quietly honing his skills and building a strong foundation for success.
So it sounds like he wasn't chasing those quick wins or flashy victories.
Not at all. He was playing the long game. And that's a really powerful lesson for all of us. Because in a world that's so obsessed with instant gratification and overnight success, it's easy to get caught up in that.
Right. It can be tempting to look for those shortcuts or to try and project an image of success that we haven't actually earned.
Totally. And that's exactly the kind of thinking that ego loves. It wants us to take the easy route, to avoid the hard work, to prioritize appearances over substance. But ultimately, that approach just leads to disappointment and frustration.
So what's the alternative? If chasing those quick wins and trying to fake it until we make it isn't the answer, what is?
That's where this idea of quiet confidence comes in. It's about doing the work, mastering your craft, and letting your actions speak for themselves.
I like that. quiet confidence. It's about substance over style, about long-term growth over short-term gains. It's about focusing on what really matters and letting go of that need for external validation.
Exactly. And that's not always easy, especially in a world that's constantly bombarding us with messages about what success is supposed to look like.
It's like we're being told that we need to be louder, bolder, more all the time.
Yeah, and that can be really exhausting.
Yeah.
And it can also lead us down a path that's not really aligned with our true values or our definition of success.
So how do we resist that? How do we cultivate that sense of quiet confidence in a world that often seems to reward the opposite?
Well, the book offers some really practical advice for that.
Mm.
And a lot of it comes down to shifting our focus inward,
Hmm.
cultivating a deeper sense of self-awareness and understanding what truly motivates us.
That makes me think about all those tempting shortcuts we encounter these days. Get rich quick schemes, social media hacks for instant fame.
Oh, yeah. And those things, they can be really seductive, especially when we're feeling that gap between where we are and where we want to be.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like we're trying to juice our way to success instead of putting in the real work.
Exactly. And just like those athletes who ultimately face downfall, relying on ego as a shortcut, it might work for a little while,
Yeah.
but eventually it catches up with you.
It's like building a house on a foundation of sand. It might look impressive for a while, but it's not going to last.
Right. And when the storms come, and they will come, that house is going to crumble.
So how do we build a stronger foundation? How do we make sure our success is built on something more solid, something more enduring?
Well, that's a great question, and I think that's something we're going to be exploring in more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Well, I, for one, am definitely looking forward to that. But before we go, I'm curious to get your take on this. What about those people who seem to achieve incredible things because of their ego? The bold, charismatic leaders, the risk takers who aren't afraid to put themselves out there. How do they fit into this whole idea of ego as the enemy?
That's a really interesting question. And I think it gets to the heart of the nuance here because it's not as simple as saying that all ego is bad. There's a difference between healthy confidence and ego-driven arrogance. And I think that's something we need to unpack a bit more.
Well, I guess that's a conversation for next time then.
Yeah, I think so. We'll definitely pick up on that in the next part of our deep dive.
Can't wait.
So where were we? Ah, yes, we were talking about those seemingly successful people who, well, they seem to have pretty healthy egos.
Yeah, those people who seem to thrive on their ego, like maybe some of those bold, charismatic leaders who take a lot of risks, the kind of people who aren't really afraid to put themselves out there. How do they fit into all of this whole idea of ego as the enemy?
Yeah, that's a really important point because it's not quite as black and white as saying that all ego is bad.
Right, because some people, you see them and it seems like their ego is almost like a superpower or something.
Right, exactly. And I think the key is to distinguish between healthy confidence and ego-driven arrogance.
Okay, so how do we know the difference?
Well, I think it comes down to motivation.
Yeah.
What's driving you? Are you doing things to impress others, to feed your ego? Or are you doing them because you genuinely care about the work, about making a difference, about something bigger than yourself?
I see, so it's about intention.
Exactly. It's about checking in with yourself and asking yourself, why am I doing this? What's my real motivation here? And if the answer is to stroke my ego, then that's a pretty good sign that you might be heading down the wrong path.
It sounds a lot easier said than done, though.
Oh, for sure. It definitely takes practice. But the more you do it, the easier it becomes to recognize those ego-driven impulses and to choose a different path, a path that's more aligned with your values and your true self.
So it's like building a muscle. The more you work it, the stronger it gets.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And the book actually offers some really concrete advice on how to develop that muscle, how to cultivate that quiet confidence that allows you to let go of the need to impress others and just focus on doing the work that matters to you.
Like what kind of advice?
Well, one thing the book talks about is the importance of seeking honest feedback.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It can be. It can be really tempting to surround ourselves with people who just tell us what we want to hear. Those yes men who stroke our egos and make us feel good about ourselves. But that doesn't actually help us grow.
No, it's like living in an echo chamber.
Exactly. True growth comes from being willing to hear the hard truths, to acknowledge our weaknesses, and to seek guidance from people who will challenge us to become better.
So it's about surrounding ourselves with people who will tell it to us straight, even when it's not what we want to hear.
Right. You need those people in your life, the ones who aren't afraid to call you out on your BS and who will push you to be your best self, even when it's uncomfortable.
Okay, so once we find those people, how do we make sure that we're actually open to their feedback, even when it stings a little?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it starts with humility, you know, recognizing that we don't have all the answers, that we have a lot to learn, and that other people might have valuable insights that we can benefit from.
And maybe checking that ego at the door.
For sure. Ego can make it really hard to accept feedback, especially if it's critical. But if we can approach it with an open mind and a willingness to learn, it can be incredibly valuable.
Absolutely. Feedback is a gift, even when it comes wrapped in sandpaper.
Mhm. I love that. Feedback is a gift even when it's wrapped in sandpaper. I'm going to have to remember that one.
Feel free to steal it. But, thinking about all of this whole idea of ego and success, it really seems to emphasize the importance of inner work, right? It's not about chasing external validation or trying to fit into some predefined mold of what success is supposed to look like.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I've been thinking the same thing. It's really about cultivating a deep sense of self-awareness, of integrity, of purpose.
It's like defining success on your own terms, based
Mhm.
on your values, your passions, your unique contribution to the world.
Exactly. It's about asking yourself, who do I want to be? Not just, what do I want to achieve?
That's a great question. Who do I want to be? I think that's something we could all benefit from reflecting on a bit more. But before we get too philosophical, let's bring this back to the book for a minute.
That's good.
We've been talking a lot about the dangers of ego, but I'm curious, does the book offer any specific advice on how to actually manage our ego? Practical tips and strategies that we can use in our everyday lives?
It does, and one of the simplest yet most powerful pieces of advice is to focus on doing, not being.
To do, not to be. What does that mean exactly?
It's about shifting our focus from trying to be someone, the most successful, the most talented, the most whatever, to simply doing the work that matters to us.
So it's about action, about showing up every day and putting in the effort, even when it's unglamorous or challenging.
Precisely. It's about letting go of that need to constantly prove ourselves and just focusing on the process, on the journey.
And on enjoying the ride.
Exactly. Because ultimately, that's what it's all about, right? Finding joy in the process and the pursuit of our goals. And when we can do that, when we can let go of that ego-driven need to be somebody, that's when we can truly start to thrive.
I like that. It's about finding that balance between striving for excellence and being content with where we are in the moment.
Exactly. And that's a lifelong practice. It's something we have to work on every single day. But it's worth it because when we can find that balance, when we can let go of the need to constantly feed our egos, that's when we can truly start to live a life that's both meaningful and fulfilling.
As we're talking about all this, it's making me realize that this isn't just about achieving success in our careers or whatever else it is that we're striving for. This is about living a better life, a more authentic life, a life that's aligned with our values.
I think you're absolutely right. It's about becoming the best version of ourselves, not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of everyone around us.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected, that our actions have ripple effects, and that by choosing to live a life that's guided by humility, compassion, and a genuine desire to make a positive impact, we can create a better world for ourselves and for future generations.
I love that. It's not just about personal success. It's about contributing to something larger than ourselves.
Right. It's about leaving the world a little bit better than we found it.
This whole conversation is reminding me of something that the Dalai Lama once said.
Oh, do tell.
He said, our prime purpose in this life is to help others. And if you can't help them, at least don't hurt them.
Wow, that's beautiful. And it really gets to the heart of what we've been talking about. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together and that by choosing to act with kindness, compassion, and humility, we can make a real difference in the world.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a perfect place to leave our listeners with something to ponder as we wrap up this part of our deep dive. So much for helping others. I think we just spent the last however long talking about ourselves.
Well, maybe helping ourselves is the first step to helping others.
True, true. You got to get your own house in order before you can start inviting people over.
Exactly. So let's recap a little bit, shall we? We started this deep dive talking about ego as the enemy of success.
Right. How it can trip us up, lead us to make bad decisions, hold us back from reaching our full potential.
And we've talked about a lot of different aspects of that, like the gap between taste and skill.
Oh yeah, that tricky space where we can recognize excellence, but our own abilities haven't quite caught up yet.
And how ego can tempt us to try and fill that gap with, I don't know, pretense, shortcuts, all sorts of things that ultimately don't really work.
Yeah, we talked about the importance of doing the work, of mastering our craft, of focusing on substance over style.
And of cultivating that quiet confidence that comes from knowing that you're putting in the effort, that you're constantly growing and learning.
And that you're not letting your ego call the shots.
Exactly. But even though we've been talking about ego in the context of success, it feels like this conversation has really been about something much bigger than that.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's about living a good life, a meaningful life, a life that's aligned with our values.
It's about being the kind of person that we can be proud of, the kind of person who makes a positive impact on the world.
Yeah, and I think that starts with being honest with ourselves about who we are, and where we want to go.
It's about recognizing our strengths and our weaknesses, our ego-driven tendencies and our aspirations.
And about being willing to do the work, the inner work, to become the best version of ourselves.
It's a lifelong journey, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's a journey worth taking. And I think
Yeah.
we can all take comfort in knowing that we're not alone on this path, you know?
Yeah, we all have those moments where our ego gets the better of us.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We all stumble. We all make mistakes.
Yeah.
But it's how we pick ourselves up, how we learn from those experiences that really defines who we are.
It's about having the courage to be vulnerable, to admit when we're wrong, to ask for help when we need it.
And to keep striving to be better, not for the sake of our egos, but for the sake of something bigger than ourselves.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a few final thoughts.
All right, shoot.
First, remember that ego is the enemy, but it's not an enemy that we have to conquer or defeat. It's more like a dance partner,
Dance partner.
Yeah, like we have to learn to dance with our ego, to recognize its moves, to anticipate its steps, and to lead it in a direction that serves us, not the other way around.
I like that. Learning to dance with our ego.
And second, remember that this is a journey, not a destination. There's no finish line, no point at which we can say, okay, I've conquered my ego, I'm good now.
Huh. Right, like ego retirement.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process, a constant practice of self-awareness, self-reflection, and course correction.
And the more we practice, the better we get at it.
And finally, remember that you're not alone on this journey. We all have our own unique dance with ego, but we're all in it together.
And there's support available if we need it, whether it's from friends, family, mentors, therapists, or even just a good book.
So keep exploring, keep learning, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep believing in your own ability to create a life that's both meaningful and fulfilling.
And on that note, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating and often challenging world of ego and success.
Until next time, keep those egos in check, and remember, it's all about the journey, not the destination.